The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the sixth of these website entrant evaluation collections, with 6 more scores, and there will actually be 16 total. 16 groups of 6, actually the last 2 will have 2 groups of 5, so total of 94 scores. It's early in the morning here in New Zealand, so let's get started. So, as you just heard from that mock-up, this is a very quirky entry, and it sort of is setting the tone for some other quirky entries to come. I wouldn't say that all of the entries here are quite so offbeat, but there definitely are a few twists and turns in the entries that you're going to see overall. Now, I'm looking at this, and I'm sort of wondering if there was some sort of misperception of the score. So here we've got these, we've got like an A double sharp, which, you know, sounding enharmonically sounding B, and then we've got a B sharp. And if you look at the score, it has the same notes, the same notated pitches, except in treble staff, so that it's actually, in the treble staff, it's actually F double sharp going up to G sharp, right? So I don't know if it was the intention to sort of like just play around with that visual thing and to just sort of do a visual transposition rather than an actual pitch transposition downwards. But I mean, it, you know, we've got B's in our other instruments, and then 2 octaves below we've got these octave B sharps, right? So we're just basically setting up that that dissonance, or you are setting up that dissonance. So I don't know if that was an error. If you might have been looking at the piano score and thought, "Oh wow, okay, that's the bass part," and not notice the treble staff. So you know, I don't know what the rationale was. So I am just going to completely judge this score on its, you know, on the workability of the orchestration, and I'm going to not worry so much about potential errors or you know, sort of adapting and changing things around. So, you know, to the point where a lot of things might be unrecognizable compared to other entries. Okay, so when you set this up, you know, B octaves in the violas, and then an octave, you know, 1 to 2 octaves lower, you've got the B sharps. You're setting up that dissonance. It's I mean, it's totally not hard to play or anything for the musicians. It's just like, what is the effect for the listener? What is the effect for the like acoustically? And I mean, it sets up a very strange overtones above the strings. So yeah, I mean, if that's the effect that you want, that's what you'll get. But yeah. And then we've got this yup bum 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 in the flutes. But how many flutes? Flutes, oboes, clarinets. How many of each? Horns and F. I mean, that's great. We've got these, but you need to tell me how many. How many flutes? One flute? Is this the first flute? Is this the second flute? Is this two flutes? Right, with two flutes. So it's kind of unclear. So those are things you kind of have to work out. And it's a little strange that you've got these differences of you've got the difference between the dynamics in these parts, right? So there's really no need for the bassoons and the clarinets to be marked down like this to piano. Like you're putting them in the background so far, and especially when the other instruments crescendo to fortissimo. Now, this is all fine. What you're doing here, and then running up to this F. Usually, you when you push oboes really high, they get thinner and thinner sounding. So this F up here may not be all that great of a note to trade off with the flute or flutes, right? Now, a lot of times we see high oboe parts written in classical and romantic scores, but if you look at what's going on in the strings, usually they are doubling the first violins, right, or second violins. So there's some cushioning, right? The oboe isn't quite so naked, right? That's like, but okay. So here you've got these octaves running up, and then you just sort of drop out with your oboes, even though they could easily just jump up to the D, right? You sent them all the way up to F here, so there's no reason why they couldn't, right? And then here you're throwing in this this kind of accompaniment right in here. So going strictly by my website evaluation criteria, the pitch weight in the upper middle register, the piano is not a concern because you've got lower parts in across your first 8 bars. Thematic material repeating often. Well, we'll see on the next screen how repetitive this is in terms of approach. But in terms of the melodic development soaring quite high, I mean, this is all pretty much playable. It's not it's not the most musical thing to get the top, the highest possible notes on the flute, but they're still considered musical notes, right? So you're going up to the top D, for instance. But I mean, there are flute players who can play top E, like they keep going higher, E, F, and so on, but like it just becomes kind of more whistly and breathless, right? It's not as if it's a strong, powerful, super potent note like it would be, say, on a jazz trumpet, right? Where jazz trumpet players push higher than their top C. I actually heard John Faddis, the jazz trumpet player and band director, push his trumpet all the way up to the top C on the piano. And he was just messing around, and his lip was in a beautiful shape, and he was playing all over the top 2 octaves between high C, like what we would consider to be high C for a trumpet, and the top C of the piano. He might have even gone higher. You get up to a certain point, and the pitches stop making sense, right? So the same thing kind of happens with the flutes when you push them up into like the top octave, where a piccolo is very clear and precise, right? They just stop. And I've actually pushed piccolo all the way up to D above the piano, in a couple of pieces. And yeah, once again, it not only does it stop making sense, it's actually not as piercing as you would think. It starts to just fall apart. But this is all right. I'm just thinking that like it would have been way better to support it with oboe from below, and then and like not had your lower winds being piano, but also forte, right? Everybody could be forte. Join the party, right? And then here, this pianissimo. I mean, but why? Why is this? I see you're sort of wanting to push forward to the return of this idea. That's fine, but maybe you could start from mezzo piano, pushing forward, because everybody else is playing fortissimo. This will come through very shrilly because you're going up to that top D, and then the strings right in here will just sort of be murmuring along underneath it. So it's just like in terms of a proportional balance and the ear of the listener being able to make sense of what's going on. You're not being very easy on them right here. So here we're kind of seeing some similar stuff going on, and once again, it's like a direct visual transposition of what's on the treble staff, but put onto a bass staff. So here you've got a sounding D, which is actually scored as a B in the treble staff of in the piano part. So it's just kind of strange how this was done, and this is sort of the same thing as well. Sort of it kind of comes across as an error. So this is the kind of thing where I feel that you would need to really develop this a little bit more if you intended to do that kind of trick. I think you'd have to justify it just with a little bit more intricate, hands-on kind of approach, right? So, like for instance, here, this is the same thing. This is a direct transposition of the E fifth that is in the left-hand treble staff, but what the E line in the treble staff is actually a G line in the bass staff, right? So it ends up you end up setting up all these conflicts, right? B sharp against B. You're giving us a grounding note of G in a harmony that is all about E major, right? Or E Lydian. And then here we've got this unison, bum 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 bum, and then it's trading off to oboe for some reason. Not really clear why. So this is somewhat of a carbon copy of the first four bars, but I'll give you a break on it because you have these big solid thumps at the beginning of each. I think that is enough to change it, but I would still think that you would need to do way more with your arrangement in order to justify the change of harmony. Changing right hand treble staff parts to left hand bass staff parts on the same lines rather than transposing the actual pitches down an octave or whatever. Okay, so moving on. We have some of the same thing. Like in the left-hand staff of the piano part, there are a couple of E's and a couple of A's, right? And I guess in treble staff, this is the E space and this is the A line, right? But changed to bass staff, that becomes the G space and the C line, right? It's kind of strange what you're doing in here. I'm not sure that it totally makes harmonic sense, right? It's it might be kind of a trick to sort of change up the harmony. Maybe this is something that you do in your own compositions and stuff. But I'm not so sure that it leaves you with a coherent approach, right? I think that you would have to do more developing of the internal harmony to make it more logical, right? because you're just basically using the very few voices that are represented by the fingers playing on the keyboard, and you're not really orchestrating it out, right? It's just transcribing a few of those notes onto different parts, right? So really, in these orchestrations, think of filling things out. If you're going to do something weird with the harmony, justify it with a more developed harmonic approach. If you're going to use that same approach right in here, there needs to be more activity, more things that propel the music forwards, right? So, because like one of the problems here is there is a lot of motion, but the motion isn't really building on itself and pushing the music forwards as much as it could be, right? Yeah, and you have some strange things like you have fortissimo here, diminuendo, and then pianissimo crescendo, right? And you're sending your horn player all the way up to high C. I seem to remember. Yeah, so hang on, I'm just checking this out. Okay, so you've got so it is transposing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that makes sense. Right, it's just that this is written as if it were this staff. Right, it's the same exact notes on the same lines and spaces, but you have just given it to a bass instrument with a bass staff. So this becomes a D instead of a B, right? And then here you have kept that same harmonization, I guess, but you're pushing your horn player all the way up to that high C, right? And just as these brass instruments are getting to very, very strong registers for them, and there could be no stronger register for the horn. It's just really, they will be screaming when they get up to that high C, right? You are diminuendoing with your winds, right? So I think you should have everybody go the same direction, with the same amount of force. So here we get to that that upper middle register idea. There are no issues with the with registers. With this, it's spread out. It's more fully orchestrated. Yeah. I mean, okay. So here you're fading out. Okay, fortissimo, piano, diminuendo. I mean, see, this is fine because you're trying to fade in and fade out. Yeah, it's just a little strange, Like right here, you've got this really, really high clarinet note, and the high horn. You got this. You're asking your B flat trumpet player to play a high D at piano, right? That's not really feasible, right? I mean, there are some people who can do that, but you're also telling them to play an accent, right? So, I mean, this seems more like wind scoring to me, right? And you're also asking your horn player to play piano on a high B, right? Which is also, fortissimo makes a lot more sense for your horn player, not piano, right? So it's just extremely difficult. And then you're immediately asking them to go diminuendo to pianissimo. It's just really, it's just really tough. Just those few notes, I mean, if this were all scored fortissimo, that would make perfect sense and it would be fine, and I would just move on and not worry about it. I would still be a little worried about these high Ds, but high D on a B flat trumpet can actually be easier than high C on a C trumpet, just because of the way the overtones work, and what's easier to lip and so on. But yeah, I don't know. This just really seems like wind parts right in here, and if you really want it to be soft, and yet you have the accents on it, so that puzzles me, right? Okay, yep, bum, 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 bum. See, this is all really fun in here. Like this is, I think that this is what you were trying to head for. You wanted a, I think you wanted something where you played with the material. It was more conversational. It was more contrapuntal, and it changed things around. So I would say that like if you come back to this, then try that. Just use this as a model, and go back maybe just maybe developing the harmony if you're going to do something that is really offbeat, and getting having more scope, and really really saying something with each phrase, just really trying to develop it out and seeing how much more you can get out of it. Yeah, it's yeah, it's just a little strange. Um, Even this has got a few things you could work on. Like, I mean, it's all possible, but yeah. So, anyways, yeah. So this one really made me think a lot, and work pretty hard on this evaluation. But it was, I appreciated the challenge, and yeah. So I feel like this needed to have a bit more development. Like some of the things that you're reaching for need to be backed up with just thinking out a few of the parts and their relationships a little bit more. So it's like, you know before we can really even approach the whole problem of balance and texture, right? We have to work out some of these functions that you have given to the instruments. But yeah, but just in terms of instrumentation, you're scoring some high notes that are a little out of range at the dynamic that you're requesting, and you're giving them accents which kind of works against the idea of piano and so on. So it's, I mean, yeah, you can have a piano with an accent, but like the context of the music there is fortissimo, right? So I would think that you would want to change the articulation and so on, right? So yeah, so there are a bunch of little problems that need to be worked out, but it's still really fun to look over. And I mean, I think you've got some great ideas, and I especially was impressed by your treatment of this right in here. This just had so much fun stuff happening in it, and I feel that this really could serve as a model for how to fix things that came before. Okay, so with that, I will thank you so much for this really cool. I mean, you're just so different entry, and there are a lot. There's just so many differences in this particular collection. So we might as well go look at the next one. All right, so Ryan, thank you for a very developed, worked out entry, and in fact, you took things all the way up to the agitato, and I mean, you put a lot of work into this. I mean, I'm not trying to get people to support me on Patreon by saying things like this, but because it's all the same to me. I'm getting enough support. I don't need to get more members. It's, there's a beautiful balance there between my work life and my educational life and everything else. But I mean, if you're going to put this much work into it, for this quality, you might want to get a longer evaluation. That's all I'm going to say. Okay, so yeah. All right. So let's address a few things before I jump into the specific criteria. And the first thing is, like, all down bows. I think that it's fine, but I don't think you should put it on this particular beat. I think this should be up bow. I think you should be down, 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 up. Right? because you are trying to change what happens here, right? It's yeah, bump 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 da 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 da. It's like it's a springing kind of a feeling right here, right? Like it's not. I mean, yeah, it's sort of a Stravinskian thing, isn't it? But this isn't really Stravinskian music. It is more, it's more Mediterranean. It's more, it's Western Mediterranean. So it has a different kind of life and a different kind of context. I think I think you need to not shove every. It's like there's a real shoving feeling when you. Sorry, immediately my mind immediately went to the Righteous Brothers. You've lost that shoving feeling. So yeah, there's a real shoving kind of a sense to the music when you are giving it all, furious, fortissimo accented down bows. And I think you need to spring upwards at the end of that, right? And the truth is, whether you add these down bows or not, you're still going to get the same sound. So and you only have to mark your pattern once, right? So mark the pattern once. The players know what to do. You don't need to mark it again and again. Now, the place to say fortissimo sempre is here. Then you don't have to mention it here, right? So just fortissimo sempre, boom. And then as you bring in other instruments in, like for instance horns, you just say fortissimo sempre here, and then you don't have to keep marking it over and over again. And the same thing here, the bassoons, the place to mark this is here, right? I think it's great that you're taking the time to tell me how many people are needed. I think, like in cases like this, like you're saying A2 and then you split off and then you're coming back to A2, and that's exactly the right way to do it. Right? Okay. So now let's apply some of those criteria. So pitch weight and the upper middle register of the orchestra. You're throwing in some bassoon in here in the bass staff and like some middle register horns and so on. So that helps, especially with the timpani, to not feel just so suspended above the rest of the orchestra. That works pretty good. And I think like the next concern of the thematic material repeating, possibly sounding repetitive. I mean, here's the thing is that you are trying to vary things. You're trying to make it fuller, but like, do you really expand it with enough strength, with enough individuality, right? What would be the element that you could add that would make this sound like an expansion of that, right? That would really pull it upwards or outwards. So I would think that that's what you should be thinking about if you are thinking about that criteria. If you are focused on that. Okay. I mean the extra weight is not going to make much of a difference if it's just basically the same area, right? So or the same more or less the same timbres, right? Just like slightly filled in. So, what are the solutions to that? Maybe adding some brass. Maybe, like here, you're adding an octave, but maybe you could have also added an octave. You could have gone to divisi octaves here in your violins, and so we could really hear that expansion, because this note, even though it is it is sort of in approaching the strongest register of the piccolo, it still will get absorbed by the sound of the strings to a degree, right? It'll be there, but it will still get, there's still so much of a homogeneous sound here with the winds and the strings. They will tend to absorb what's going on in the piccolo unless the piccolo player plays out, right? And maybe they will, maybe they won't. Sometimes on mock-ups you'll hear it and sometimes you don't, and that's actually pretty realistic. All right. So aside from that, it's really nicely orchestrated. I would say like triangle is way softer than you think. And the other risk is that like if you get the triangle player to just really beat the hell out of their triangle and so that they can be heard over a big tutti like this, big wind and string tutti, then it starts to sound like a telephone, right? That's like that was the first thing that people noticed once they invented the ringer on the telephone, was that, all of these beautiful 19th century works that had triangle trills, like suddenly, it sounded like a telephone ringing, right? It was just a sort of a backwards problem. So I would just say, watch out. If you can really get the triangle player to play as jangly as they need to be heard over all of this sort of high frequency kind of more trebly sort of playing, then you just will get that telephone effect. All right, now moving on to the whole question of the melodic development soaring quite high, the accompaniment figures covering a wide range. You're using your oboes in here. I feel that like clarinet is the stronger instrument, with no offense to oboes. Like the you're keeping it in the sweet spot of the oboe player for the most part, but I'm just wondering, like, how much force can the oboe player really put into that against the strings and the sense of the sort of harmonized pattern above. I feel like clarinets are a better bet there, just in terms of balance, or even like doubling the oboes and the clarinets. And I feel that like this line is just not strong enough where it is. Just even A2 oboes, or even if you were to go to A2 clarinets, I would think like you got some people who are not really doing quite enough right in here, right? There are ways of scoring out the string accompaniment that could double some of these pitches the way that you're doing, and also double some of what the oboes are doing here, right? Just to give it more force, more emphasis in the music. It feels like it's a little undernourished right in there. Now, right in here we got the yep, and then here you just throw in this the piccolo coming in. I think that's very clever. Keeping in mind, sending strings way up to that place. I think once you get up to C, D, it's playable, but it is a bit. It's just a bit screechy. You know what I mean? It's like, I've spent a lot of time on these challenges, telling people like, oh well, instruments can't play this and instruments can play that, and I'm running now into this with like these high pitches being thrown to the violins, with discussing how yes, strings can play up that high, but I mean, how musical is that? How appropriate is that? Is that really tense high sound? And it also, like when the strings get shorter and shorter and shorter, they it's not like with say brass instruments. The higher they get, like the louder they want to play. When you're playing really 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 high on a violin, the strings, the string length being so small, it really kind of requires more of a push on the bow to get a loud sound, and then that ends up with a kind of a scratchier, screechier sound, right? So it's all playable, but is it beautiful, right? So like, you just have to ask yourself that, which is one reason why I tended to sort of drop. Now, of course, like there are artificial harmonics there, and there is like legato playing, and there are a bunch of different ways of getting up to the top octave of the piano on violin that work fine. But it's just in this context of playing really loud, very very short strokes, doubling along with the winds and so on and so forth. I mean, it does work. Don't get me wrong. I just want you to think about some of these things, right? So it's like I'm not saying you wrote something that will sound bad. That's not it at all. It's just what's the consequences of that choice. Yeah. Yeah, so just to let everybody know, this is a concert pitch score, right? So because you can see this, we've got the D octaves in the horns and so on. We've got B's in our clarinets, and I might actually ask people next year to tell me, leave a little box right here. There will be a checklist. I'm gonna have an editing checklist and tell people like look through all of these things. These are my preferences. If you can do them, if you can't do them, you don't want to do them, that's fine. But you have to tell me that it's in concert pitch, for instance, would be one of them. All right, so moving on. Sigh at too many staccato accents. Well, I got to tell you, Ryan, there is no obligation for you to import all of the original articulation marks that were in the score, right? That's it totally is not. It is not something that is necessary for you to do, right? You can include them or not, right? You can. I mean, Falla wanted a particular kind of punchy playing from his pianist, right? So that's why he's got so many staccato accents. But a staccato accent means a different kind of a thing to a different kind of a player, in the orchestra. All right, so moving forwards, we still are thinking about the melodic development soaring quite high, and here you make a few compromises. You keep the general arc moving forwards, which I think is great. Yeah, and of course you're pushing all the way up to that very high E with the strings, and I think that is possible. Like once again, but it's not a very lovely sound. Now, I want to caution you about one thing, and that is right here. That is that like the phrasing of this part is it starts on the second beat, right? Bum, and then the phrase starts bum 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 da 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 da. It's not da 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 dun dun dun. It's like this is not. These are two separate phrases, right? So if you keep the piccolo part way up high like that, then it sort of kind of joins the two phrases together and takes away some of the emphasis that you can have on that second beat. Now, maybe you don't want it. I don't care. But, that's... Yeah, but this is coming to the end, and then this is starting something new. Because it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1, right? So where the phrases really come together is right on this beat here, right? 2 and 3 and 1, ba 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 ba, right? So this at the beginning, here's where the phrases really dovetail, not actually here, right? Because I think it just takes away some of the emphasis when these are, like what are you running up to? We're running up to this big note here. Yay, we got there. Now we're going to stay on it, right? See, that's the problem that I'm seeing. And also just, the consequences of keeping that piccolo part really shrilly above there and kind of dominating the rest of the sound there, right? Is the risk. But, in terms of the evaluation criteria, the concern about upper middle register relentlessness is not an issue. So, the rest of it's pretty well scored. I like that. I like the horn and the cellos, and I think this all works together pretty well. You really kind of for a big huge tutti opening, you use very little in the way of brass. So there's not a whole lot of feedback I can give you, which is also somewhat frustrating. It's just like you bring in the brass later, right? So we're in a place beyond where I have agreed to evaluate, and it's a shame. So if you're going to put this much work into it, just consider jumping into Patreon for a couple of months. I just think it's a shame that I'm not able to give you more assistance with that. All right, but this is still very, very cool. The English horn and the oboe being partners here, and also like the distance between them. That's really kind of fun. And then throwing in the bassoon. One thing I would caution against, and that is the bassoon pacing from below. Right. So there's a certain wonderful wildness to this as originally scored. Okay, but I think that it gets too tame when you kind of punctuate the beginning of each bar. It's like you're kind of it's like the bassoonist is suddenly timekeeping, right? And I don't feel that the line needs any timekeeping. I think that just the almost arbitrary running away with the music is kind of fun, and it's great to sort of give it to one little section of the orchestra and let them run wild, right? So I would say the wilder you want it to be, the less you need the pacing. But this all comes in really nicely, and I love the clarinets working together with the bassoons, right? So you're setting that up, transitioning smoothly into the next passage. You've maintained the driving staccato and everything else. It's a good transition from what's happened before. One thing I would just say is thinking about, like, do you really intend everybody to be fortissimo all the way through here? Right? Like, you've set up your fortissimo dynamic, right? And there really isn't, there's no change indicated in the piano score, but just like with the articulation marks, you are under no obligation to keep what the to hold on to what the composer wrote in the piano score, right? It's like you are adapting this music, and you can take a great piece of piano music, and if you do everything that the pianist or the excuse me everything that is in the piano score on the orchestra, and it can end up being too big all the time, right? So I would say, like, right in here, is there any, you really want them to go up to triple F right in here? Like, is that really what you want, right? Do you want to, are you headed for a section that has got more delicacy, or more restraint, or like how are we going to hear some of the different colors of the orchestra rather than just the loud ones, right? So, anyways, with that, I will say thank you for this really great score, and and for being a part of this year's orchestration challenge. I really look forward to your contribution, and that of everybody else in this particular group. I think you'd all have some really interesting approaches, from the different personalities that I'm seeing in these orchestrations. So with that said, let's not delay anymore and go on to the next evaluation. Excellent score, Daniel. Just really enjoyed this. I mean, there's a lot that we can work through, and there's a lot of help I think I can give you with some of the proportions. But I mean, I think the overall approach is really fun. So to start off with, let's actually just go straight to the evaluation criteria, right? And just kind of talk about some of the strengths as reflected in that. So, pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano is not a concern. You spread things out quite well throughout all of the different sections. Thematic material possibly sounding repetitive if orchestrated the same way. You avoided that by changing the general approach of the first four bars when it came back again, and then right in here, I mean, it's similar, but you're adding strings, and it's enough of a change to justify. So I feel that worked really, really well. Now, as to the melodic development, soaring quite high. You have basically just solved that by having Piccolo play solo right in here, right, and then kind of playing at an octave with your strings and so on, which is all very charming. The accompaniment figures covering a wide range. You solve that basically with dividing pizzicato up and so on. Arco in here, it's not very strong really, right in here, but there are places where you could strengthen that up here and there, right? Now, before we move forwards from these first 16 bars, let's really look at them a little bit more intensely. Okay, so you're asking your trumpet player to come in there really hot. Like, notice that in Sibelius it's marked in red. They're saying, hey, this is, there's some consequences to asking people to play this high. Right? That's really what what those colors should mean. And then, of course, there's like out of range notes, right? And here you're seeing that we're starting to get kind of a warning color here as well. I think it's because, hang on, this is not transposed. All right, so let's put the transposition in here, right? So that's just easier for me to read. So yeah, so here you can see you're going up to a G, like a written G, which is not, I mean, it's not difficult for a horn player to play a high G. It's just more that there is less control, right? Like the higher you get with brass players, the less absolute beautiful control that they have that they might have in lower registers, right? And there are a bunch of other consequences which I've written about in some of my writings. 100 More Orchestration Tips has got a whole chapter about high Cs for trumpet and horn. So right in here, you've got this pizzicato right at the beginning. You say non divisi, and let's see, I was thinking like I could play a B octave right way up high and just. I mean, there's ways of doing this. I think what you should do here is not write chords like this for your first violins. You should write one massive big pizzicato on the downbeat here, for all of your players, spreading it out. There could be like double stops in all instruments, and then you don't have to give this weird triple stop to the second violins. Right? Because you really want that pluck, yeah, and then pluck, da da da, pluck, da 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 da, pluck, da da da. You know what I mean? You want that just sense of huge emphasis, right? Fortissimo, I'm guessing. So I think the thing that works against this idea here is your sense of regularity in your percussion. You're just really going thump, 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 thump. You know what I mean? It's just maybe it's a little too regular. I mean, maybe you could have some sort of a hit on every beat, but like moving through different percussion instruments. Boom, boom, that kind of thing, right? Rather than thump, 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 right? So it's just like the regularity is almost chilling, right? So just think if there's some way to bring in some variation so that it's not quite so staid, right? Now here you've got oboes, clarinets, A2 working all together. Now, here's the question is, do you really need to do this? Yet dun dun dun. Is that the phrase? Because that is what it is here. Yet dun 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 da 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 dum ba da 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 bump, right? But that isn't what's happening here. It's byum 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 bump. Oh, sorry. Byum 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 da 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 byum 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 da 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 da. right? It's this is not going da 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 dun da 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 dun, because like when you kind of insist on this, you're messing up your lines, you're messing up your transitions, right? Da 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 dun fortissimo, and you're stepping right on the beautiful entrance of the piccolo. I can't hear the beginning note here because your middle winds right here are so loud, right? And then I can't hear like the beautiful nimble playing right in here. So you just cut this off, right? Biam 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 da 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 biam 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 da 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 soft. Ba 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 da 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 da. You see what I'm saying? So you don't really need that. And the same thing here. You are screamingly loud here. You've got these high C's from your trumpet players, and then ending on this high B, still really loud. And yada da da da. And how can I hear this lovely, cute little beginning right here? Right? It's just like it just really steps on the, there's another issue as well. Like whenever you have a very soft section following a very loud section, the force of the reverberation in the hall pushes forwards into the soft section, right? So you it's almost like you want to almost foreshorten what happens. Now there's nothing you can do because the eighth note is fortissimo, right? Or you could throw in like maybe some diminuendo right at the end. So da 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 da, right? You just like maybe just it's a little softer at the end, and then that would facilitate the piccolo standing out really beautifully here. Now, like in some folk music, especially Western Mediterranean, Southern France, Eastern Spain, and so on. Like there is and just across Europe in general, there is this kind of like the little pipes, like little flutes, little folk flutes playing with somebody kind of beating on a tabor or whatever the local version of that is. And some of that is military, some of it is just like farting around and having fun. Okay. You can hear a version of that like in Mio's Suite Provençale. He's got this very, very cool thing for two piccolos and I think that's a snare drum with the snares relaxed, so it sounds a bit like a tabor or a folk drum, right? So anyways, like I think that like that's what I almost feel is missing here. Like some kind of here's where I've been talking about don't do too much timekeeping. Here's where I feel like bringing that out might be something that could possibly work if you're just having a solo piccolo. But I mean, you've already got the accompaniment from the middle strings and pizzicato, so you don't really need it. But it's just an idea. So this is like if you have A2 trombones below, and you've got here you're saying 3 trumpets in C, so you don't really say how you're dividing them up. Yeah, this could be trumpets 2 and 3, and then trumpet 1 on top. You wouldn't want to double the 1 on top because that could lead to cracking and other kinds of things. It's just like the higher the trumpet goes, the more effective it is as a solo. And so if you have 3 trumpets dividing up octaves, it's better to have the second and third on the bottom, and then their combined overtones feeds the top one, right? And it just works a lot better. Okay, so not to get sidetracked, the whole point of this was that why throw in the violins if you can't hear them, right? And then once again, da 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 dun, biam 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 dun 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 dun, and just leave this out, dun 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 dun, and then just have the strings start here. Bum, ba, ba, ya, da, 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 da. It's just so much more effective because stomping is like this. It is not a very effective dovetail, right? It's almost like somebody stepping on your toes, right? It's just really stepping on the toes of these softer and it takes away their emphasis, right? There's something that is really thrilling and emotionally powerful about suddenly dropping to piano after a fortissimo, right? So you take away that thrilling drop when the fortissimo just obtrudes itself into the first beat of the soft section. That's what I'm trying to say. All right, and then you got your octaves right in here, triple octave if you consider the piccolo on top. And normally I would be sort of a stickler to say like, oh, flutes they're not very strong in their middle register, lower register, but it doesn't really matter here because there's nothing to compete with, right? It's just strings working together, and the flutes are just kind of starting and getting going and running to the top, so that's fine. Okay, so speaking of things that obtrude, it just like you probably notice that this notes just stands out like a sore thumb. It just like, and there's two reasons why. Okay, so the first one is something I was referring to in the previous evaluation, is that the phrase starts here. It doesn't start here, right? You ought to da 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 dum. And then the next phrase starts ba 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 da 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 dum da 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 dum. Right, so it's like this is so when you sort of force them together by having a note that starts long on the downbeat, then it just sort of messes with the continuity. The other reason why this sort of stands out is because it's completely alone in its it is a powerful note played by a resonant instrument right where nobody else is really doing anything, right? So if this were, if there were more going on in terms of like harmony or something like that, or if this, or maybe say this started later, right? And you had the horns like playing more of a role supporting the harmony of the strings in a direct way rather than just kind of one single note. Then I think that you would get a better balance and a better mix. But as it is, just really just it's kind of like a foghorn just sitting right there in your music. Okay, now here this is all good, right? See, like this is the horn working together. I'm not so sure why you are having, which horn player is playing what. See, I'm not sure. Like you were very careful about saying A2 here and there and so on. Not sure about here, what's going on there. But what is going on here? Is it A2 horns and then going to 4 parts? Or is it the first and third going to 4 parts? See, I don't know what you mean here. So it's hard for me to give you feedback on that, right? Now, which, is this 1 and 2? Is this just 1? Is this 4? 3 and 4? I don't know, right? So right in here, I would say, give that to the second. That's a second horn part, not a third or a fourth horn part. Right, that's more of a second horn part. It could be second or first, right? But it's just depends. It's like it's a subsidiary part, but you still need your most capable person who normally does that. So I would say just give it to the second horn, and like it'll be a really good balance because they're used to mixing and supporting and everything else, right? So yeah, but I'm dubious about this. I mean, in other respects, though, it's like, is it well orchestrated? Yes. Does it work nicely? I think so. And the doublings in here, it's a little iffy to give this to the flute, right? Because you're going really, really low on the flute, and you're going crescendo with these other stronger instruments, and so the flute will just basically disappear by around here, like in terms of its support of the violins. It just doesn't really have enough strength. So I would say just come in here, like you can finish your yep, bum, 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 in this case, do that, right? Instead of, like, as I'm telling you to not do that here, do that here. And then just have, like, oboe take over, playing harmony with the clarinet part, right? And then you just get way better support. And the oboe will fill in the sound of the violin here rather than just kind of fading and gasping out and being gone, right? Now, see, like, if this were pianissimo, though, if everybody was playing pianissimo, then I would say no problem with the flute. But you're going piano crescendo. So like by here, like I don't know what crescendo means. If crescendo is just like, you know, like mezzo piano, then the flute is fine. If the crescendo is to mezzo forte or forte, then forget it, right? The flute is not the best combination with the strings there. And especially when you're saying molto marcato, right? Who does marcato better than a oboe player or a bassoonist, right? That's like that just sense of pointy pushing, like I mean clarinet, it does great at staccato and accents, don't get me wrong, but it is a different kind of attack. It's a more moderated attack. For just that absolute, pinpoint precision, the double reeds are the instruments to score. So I'm not saying that to try to change this to a bassoon part or anything. It's fine, but I'm just saying like comparing that to the flute, it's just way better to use oboe. Anyway, just such a fun score though, like, and some great ideas, and I just really love the difference between these two parts. I love this big honking on the bottom here by the lower heavy brass, though. I sort of, I kind of think like, why are you not putting that in here too, right? It's like once again, there are gaps. This is something that I noticed in my last collection of people sort of like leaving out of like they'll set up this really nice accompaniment style or some other kind of a thing, and then it just like it won't finish up, right? So just be mindful of that, right? If you have a certain approach, here you're going what's going on here, right? Why are we not completing the accompaniment pattern on the downbeat here? So just think about the continuity, and then the score will be a lot more cohesive. And don't step on the beginnings of your beautiful soft sections with loud, boisterous people who aren't finishing, who do not need to complete a phrase that isn't scored that way in the original, right? So anyway, thanks so much, Daniel. I really, really appreciate it. And once again, I think everybody is seeing how different all of the entries are compared to each other. And speaking of which, let's take a look at the next entry. Okay, David, so I see what you're trying to do here. You are giving me like a note for note transcription of the opening, and just really trying to interpret exactly what Falla expressed in terms of pitch, register, and so on and so forth. So, in that regard, what you're doing here works, but and I'm just going to say apologize for cutting off the bottom of the strings, but they don't actually contribute anything. There are no lower string parts, so hope people will forgive me for that. It's just I'm trying to get this rather smaller score into a more readable format, so everybody can see it a lot clearer. So yeah, I just feel that like it's just a whole question of scope, right? So my philosophy, my approach is to interpret the music in terms of like the overall meaning of what the original composer was trying to express, right? And sometimes that at least in my thinking, that involves an expansion of the material rather than an exact transcription. So I'm going to evaluate your score. Like, I'm not going to be critical over the fact that the pitch weight is in the upper middle register of the piano. Like, I'm not going to critique it on those particular grounds, but I'm just going to say that, like, in terms of like what's possible, I think you're showing me like 1/10 of what's possible for you as an orchestrator here, right? It just would have, like, here, moving on into B and so on, like you continue to orchestrate and so on. This stuff is great, like, so I'm just like, it's more a more centered, more, more richly interpreted and imagined kind of orchestration. So I just really wish that I had seen that here. That's all I'm going to say. It's like, I'm not saying that like there's any failing or any fault or anything like that. That was, I think this is more of a clear decision that you chose to make, and I respect that totally. Okay, so I'm going to evaluate it purely on those particular merits. Okay, and not constantly get on your case for not giving me bigger tooties at the beginning. All right, so we're starting off here, and according to my criteria, thematic material, possibly sounding repetitive if orchestrated the same way throughout. It's a similar. There's like a similar concern here as with a couple of previous evaluations, in that, like, you're taking this approach, pretty much throwing it into the winds, and then like here, like, you have a bit of an expansion just in terms of adding more weight to the violins, with your second violin part kind of coming in and doubling, and then then going to octaves here and so on. And you're throwing in your, like, kind of a lower E flat clarinet part, which is kind of interesting. It's it's a kind of a weaker, almost almost a mockery of like the richness of the clarinet, right? It's like so much the E flat clarinet in its, like, throat tones and Chalumeau register is almost used to sort of mock the idea of the graceful clarinet by composers like Berlioz and so on. All right. So, but not to get into that. I mean, you are bringing in kind of a new color and a new idea in there, but I just feel like it could, like, the scope could have been a little bit broader, right? This could have been octaves in your violins. This could have been, you could have added English horn doubling at the octave with the second violins below and so on. I think there was a lot more that you could have done right in there. Now, there's a slight notation note here, and here you're saying a tu sempre, so like you sort of want, like, throughout, you're just thinking that it's always a tu. So I don't think you can quite get away with that. You know what I mean? It's like a tu, and then you go to an interval, and then you go back to a tu. So I think that, like, it's better to, like, okay, in the first place, you got all these other instruments. What are they doing? All right? They can't come in here and play the harmony and let the other instruments continue on a tu. So that's one issue. And then the other issue is just, I just feel that you can't get away with that. It's either a tu or it's intervals, or you go back to a tu. You have to mark it again, right? And if you end up marking it again and intervals a tu, and so on, you might want to do separate voices, or you might want to rethink what you're doing. It's just a kind of an indication. All right, now this is kind of a strange ottava mark. Ottava with a little bent, kind of little bent line at the end, showing where the end is. So, that might be an acceptable approach with some kinds of, there might be some approaches of notation that use that line. I think that it's just so much safer to go with the dashed line and with a corner at the end. Just like go with standard as much as you possibly can, because you cannot count on people to really get it right. And like here, we're seeing some of those like ending lines are sort of stuck in your staves, seems to have gone astray, and they don't know what they're doing, right? So yeah, and then like here, like where things are getting crowded, just in general, like if you're just going to send me the first the crucial pages, right? These first two pages. If you know that is going to be the main thing that I'm looking at, and I have to set up a page like this, probably better just to cut out all the fat, right? Just cut out all of these empty staves and just send me what is, like, you can send me the whole string section if the lower strings aren't doing anything, but like no harps, no marimba, no timpani and glockenspiel, no brass section. Get rid of them all. No contrabassoon. If the contrabassoon is not contributing to it, just get rid of it, right? And then this can all be condensed down, and maybe I could cover it in two separate screens and really have a close-up and show everybody what you're working on, right? And how you orchestrated things. Okay, so the next concerns are melodic development soaring quite high. Here we're getting into a further discussion about ottava, and that is whether or not it's needed with flute parts, even on a full score. Like here, you've got all this space because nobody's doing anything in the other parts, right? So there's kind of no excuse. There's really no need to throw in an ottava for the part of the score reader either. You should be able to see what's going on here. So I would say just like eliminate the ottava, just score everything at the right pitch, and then you don't have to do the loco or anything like that, right? So loco would also be unnecessary with a standard ottava mark, right? You just see where it ends, that's it. You don't have to write loco. All right. So just in terms of the range, though, going all the way up to, so you're pushing up your piccolo player all the way up to D above the piano's high C. So I have actually scored, as I mentioned before in this group lecture, I've actually scored high Ds for piccolo, and they are not a bright, brilliant, piercing note the way that they are on a flute, right? So that's kind of the top note that you can really ask a flute player to play that's still musical, right? And then they get above that, and it becomes kind of more whispery and blowy and so on. Well, for piccolo, it's like you think it's going to be shrill, you think it's going to stand out there, it's just really going to be an incredibly high note and just kill everybody, right? And you just get this kind of a sound, right, with a little bit more pitch in it. So I would say this is the point where you'd want to drop the piccolo down a little bit and then come back in higher, or maybe just have the piccolo player like start lower and then separate from the first flute. You know what I mean? Or there's a bunch of different ways. You can look at all the other lectures that I'm doing right now, how everybody else solved that problem. But yeah, sending the piccolo player up to D above its high C. So I'm not going to say high D in the case of the piccolo. And then here, like in the mirror section, right, mirroring this, you're sending the both your flute player and your piccolo player up to E, which like just maybe there's some specialists out there who can play a high E on flute, but probably not, right? And that there's a whole question too of how shrieky this all is. Like, you're keeping your piccolo up very high, and you're keeping your and it's high here too. So these pitches are not in the original piano part, right? They are you're adding an octave on top of that, right? So if they stand out, then they will really wear at the ear. And if they don't stand out, they'll get absorbed by the violins anyways. So, one way or another, it's ultimately a losing game. That's what I'm trying to say here, right? And there's also the sense of kind of continuity of line, right? Like here, we're getting a drop off. And, if you really want enough power in your piccolo part so that it's heard and you continue on with that style, then the sudden gap here, as there's no more high D, right? D above this D, written D in the first violins and oboes and flutes. That that line coming to an end will feel very abrupt. So that's all the more reason why a lot of this can be dropped, and the piccolo player can just be used for, the piccolo player does not even have to play anything at all, right? Until about right here, and they could be playing the same pitches as the flute, and then here separating and going higher with the flutes going lower, right? That might be more what you envisioned anyways, right? Perhaps you weren't taking transposition into account here, right? So that's another thing to think about. This is cool, though, the way you're bringing in oboes kind of a little bit early to double with your flutes. But if you really want a seamless handoff, then you should have your flutes go diminuendo here. And then it'll just, it'll become about the oboes going forwards. So I do not really feel that the harmonization below, as we see it in the piano part, is strong enough as scored, right? So I promised that I wouldn't make a big deal about having bigger scoring, but like here's one place in which like the harmonization from below of the melodic parts really does need more filling in order to be in order to effectively accompany it, right? And then also there's like it's sort of missing like the whole formula of da 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 dun da 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 dun da 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 da. You cannot get away with just one oboe note, right? You have to have. If you look at the piano part, there's 3-part harmony below the melody going all the way through here, and that's you do a bit of that right in here. You do a bit of that harmonic accompaniment, and then it's missing here and it's missing here. You just have a single note of oboe, right? And it's not enough. You need to have more because you're building towards something, right? And it's also just like it's, Falla really wants that emphasis on the second beat, right? Ba da 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 da, right? So we're missing that going forwards in here, right in here. Okay, but I mean, this is really effective. The oboe and the E-flat clarinet below, right? It's actually kind of a fun, sort of a hooting sound. If you want a more secure kind of a sound, you should just go for your B-flat clarinet. Like, don't just assume that your E-flat clarinet player is there to just kind of fill in the way that the B-flat clarinet would do, and we're saying, that this is our new lead clarinet player, so just give them all of the regular stuff we would give to the first clarinetist. There's a bit of a misapprehension here. Clarinet 1 in E flat, so don't do that, right? So clarinet 1, your clarinet 1 player has earned the right to not play auxiliary instruments for most of the time, right? So, say in playing the Symphonie Fantastique, they might play first clarinet in C for the 4th movement, but then they will end up playing the second clarinet in C for the 5th movement, and the second clarinet player will play the E-flat part, right? So E-flat clarinet is an auxiliary instrument, right? So like the first player, in general, I would say throughout the wind section as much as possible, but and especially with clarinet players because they have so many auxiliaries possible, including saxophones. Give the first clarinet part to the first clarinetist and leave them on B flat or A, right? They've earned the right to be there. That's what they want to do. That's, and if you have 4 available clarinetists, it should be clarinets 1 and 2, right? So your second clarinetist is going to stay playing as a partner to the first, which is what they want too, right? They want to work together as much as possible on the same instruments. Then you don't even mention what number this is. Just say clarinet in E flat. You don't have to say clarinet 3 in E flat. No, you don't even need to say that. Just say clarinet in E flat, and then bass clarinet, same thing. So, and they will just decide who plays what. Every once in a while, you'll have the principal clarinetist might want to play E flat, like they might want to play the solo in Bolero, for instance, but usually not, right? But just sometimes it happens. So leave it up to the players. Don't lock them into positions like this where they have to do one thing or the other. Okay, so yeah, but I feel that this is actually pretty effective. And as I said, like I feel that the orchestration going forwards. I mean, I wish that the rules of this of this evaluation allowed me to evaluate the section B instead of section A. Right? I just feel that that would be a lot stronger, and I could give you more constructive feedback that you could build on, right? Rather than just kind of limiting us both, right? But I mean, if your intention is just to do a straight up transcription of the piano part itself and stick to the registers and everything else, then I feel that what you really need to do is you need to have brighter, stronger use of that upper register, right? Just like bigger, more hands-on harmonies at the beginning, and as things get a little bit bigger, you should add more than just the E flat clarinet in there. The accompaniment figures, which I didn't talk about a lot, need to be more bouncy. They need to be more lively. They can stay in the upper register if that's the intention, but just they really do have to be more agile. And I would say for that nobody can beat the B flat clarinet, right? I mean, the oboe is beautiful and precise, and it has wonderful staccato, and but it does not have the same kind of power throughout the same notes, and does not have that sort of sense of leaping that the clarinet does. That makes it sort of like cat-like, right? There's a kind of a cat-like energy in the in that particular accompaniment phrase, and the same thing right in here. So there needs to be a little bit more hands-on orchestration. It needs to fill out a little bit more. You need to not take your piccolo up so high and keep it high, and just be aware of the upper limits of possibilities for clear, beautiful melodic tone for your flutes. So that's my evaluation of this. But I mean, like, once again, I mean, I feel that you have got some chops, like just the beginning of B and then moving forwards. I mean, it shows that you have got that you've got the ability to do some of this more. So I would just say, like, don't limit yourself next time, right? Whatever the entry is going to be, and I'd really love to see you take this on again, come back for the 2022 challenge, and just it would be interesting to see how you would interpret that selection, okay? Which I'm not going to say anything about, but I've already selected, and I'm actually even considering orchestrating it soon, just to really have all my ducks in a row and have it sitting there in my on my hard drive ready to roll for next year. Alrighty, so thanks so much, David. I really enjoyed this. Actually, the more I started to pick into it, and the more things I found out to say about it, just the more I was really enjoying, really enjoying what I was looking at. So thanks so much. And now on to the next entry. All right, so what a rich, satisfying, and once again quirky score. Like, you just really approaching things from a different direction in a lot of places. So, um, like, a lot of my criteria are addressed just on the face of it in a very obvious way. But I'm going to go through it again because I know there are a lot of developing orchestrators out there. They want everything to to be very clear, and I totally agree with that. So, first of all, just a quick note about the orchestra that we've got here. Tenor saxophone, that's really fun. The two piccolos and one flute player, that's also very fun. And then kind of standard brass right in here. That's all fine. Big percussion section here, snare drum, bass, cymbals, tambourine, xylophone, and so on, and strings. So let's talk about those evaluation criteria. All right. So, like, obviously, the whole problem of pitch weight in the upper middle register of the orchestra, it's not a problem. The thematic material possibly sounding repetitive. If repeated the same way twice, you completely did everything differently every time, but near enough, right? So that there's continuity, but different enough so that there is variation. So that I really appreciated that. So let's talk about part the first part, bars 1 to 4, and then comparing it to bars 9 to 12. So I mean, you're harmonizing things fairly high right in here, and using the oboes and piccolos together, it just makes a very clear ringing sound. Just a little bit of aggressive vibrato, tremolo right in here. I think hairpins work better for this kind of thing. Forte piano, crescendo to forte. I think that's a with a hairpin is way better than just the word crescendo, right? And then it also works in your mock-up better as well if you are trying to be more realistic with, say, note performer or whatever other application you might be using or sound set you might be using along with Sibelius. So yeah, you've got this. You got really most of the weight on the second beat, right? of the second bar. It's so much fun. So this yump 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 flump, right? Just really big. I almost think that like a bass drum hit here could have been fun as well, and just big sassy full brass. It's almost. This is a case where like your strings are almost going to be inaudible, like unless like maybe you were to play like the lowest possible note of harmony in combination. Like if, like, say, like all of your lower strings were playing low D, right, on their lowest string, and then maybe you have your violins, right, which are kind of underpowered. Like you've got xylophone here, tick 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 tick, and like what else, right? It like the first violin's playing in a register that will, just the echo of, or the reverberation, right, of this massive chord here is going to swamp the sound of the violins here. It's so low. So I would say like this could be like giving. Okay, so to get back to that, lowest D possible in all these instruments, just in an effort to have the strings sound like anything at all here. And then having both your violin groups going bum 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 bum, right? So first violin's octave higher, second violin's playing this part. And I would say here's where, like, if these guys are accented, you got to accent these guys, right? And maybe I would say put back in the accented staccato that is in the original piano score, right? And then you've got a chance of this melody coming through clearer. Of course, it'll come through on the xylophone, but it'll really feel like a xylophone solo, the way that the strings are orchestrated at this point. So then compare that. We're gonna just skip this. We're gonna and come back to it. Compare that to the second treatment. Right, you've got the strings tenuto, brap brap yum yum, and the brass below, right, very brashly. And here I would say, here you can balance things, right? This rip from F sharp to F sharp. Always give your horn players like as much distance to rip as possible, because they might want to actually start a rip lower than this. Like glissando, what does that mean, right? It's like, it's not, right? It's so like I would just say like the player might want to go over, like they're going to get into the position where they can play this F sharp, and then they're going to rip up from there over their overtones, right? So I would say consult with a horn player and just get this down exactly. Like either figure out exactly what pitches it are going to be and like what is the lowest note of that and give us the lowest note, or even write them in like Stravinsky does. Okay, but yeah, just be aware of that. They're going to be playing over their harmonic series. Okay, but yeah, to get back to the way that this is orchestrated, here's where I think you could do some dynamic balancing, right? So fortissimo in your strings and in your winds, and forte in your brass. Like you've already got the tenuto mark, and they're going to be just giving it very, very clear, measured, full notes. Yeah, so like with the tenuto, there can be maybe a teeny bit of attack, but it really is a square note, right? It's like most notes for winds and brass involve like an attack at the beginning, and then the note is full, and then it sort of tapers off in a beautifully shaped ending, right? So tenuto, the note starts from silence, and then it continues on at the same exact strength, and then it drops off at the end, right? So that is going to give you a huge amount of energy. So you don't need to mark it fortissimo if you really want to balance with your, if you want to balance with your bassoons and your strings here. I would say it's strong enough, right? And then you've got these these lovely perverse parallel fourths and fifths and so on. It's so much fun. Yeah. See, so like the trumpets right in here, fortissimo, they're just going to basically smother what's going on in your middle winds, right? And the overtones at fortissimo for your higher horns here and your trumpets are also going to blot out what's going on a little bit in your flute family. So I would say just really watch out. Like, I would back off the brass right in here. Yeah, and then tambourine, bass drum, and so on. It's all fun. Yeah, it's all done well. So all right, so I just thought I would point out some of those orchestration approaches and like how to get the most out of them. I would actually say that like if you really want to double this C, do it with just have A2 piccolos right here, right? And then have the second, or excuse me, have your flute player, flute one, have your flute player play this part, this F, ba, 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 ba. It's just more effective. It's a stronger note, right? It's like, this will be shrieking, right? Whereas it'll be much more controlled for second piccolo to play this, right? All right. Otherwise, the allocation of the parts is fine. Flute 2 being piccolo 2, it's perfect. All right, so now let's backtrack a little bit, and we'll talk about like the problems of melodic development and the accompaniment figures and so on. So like you got your accompaniment figures sort of using the clarinets and the oboes together, or clarinet and oboe together, and tenor saxophone and so on. And like right in here, we've got a bit of horn in the background. You're keeping it soft, which is good. And this is kind of strange. Ya da 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 da, and then ba 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 ba. That's kind of nice, actually. So this trading off works pretty good, I would say, because like the instruments are kind of similar strength. But I would try to throw in the octave if you're going to transition from an octave line to a single line. I think this should be an octave line, right? You've got, you could throw in, this could be a second oboe part, and your first oboe player could be playing the octave lower, and then here your flute 1 player could be playing the octave in response to this. I just think it just has more continuity. The thing that you have to ask yourself with this, right, is whether or not you are adding, whether or not you are slowing down the momentum by adding inertia, Do you see what I mean? Like just like when you have all this nimble hopping around kind of stuff, if there's this guy in the background just kind of going, whatever, just kind of, and the same, you have the same problem right in here, right? So I just think I'll mention it now because it's sort of sitting in the back of my head. Like the way that you reharmonize is just brilliant. It's so much fun. Okay, but like to a certain point, does that become a drag on the energy of, like that, like I was discussing in the previous entry, right? I'm just really not getting that, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, that kind of, that real, the emphases of the original piano part are getting a little lost right in here. And so I just like, that's always the problem of putting like a cushion in the background, or like a pedal tone, or like some longer textural parts in the middle of so much energy, so much of an energetic part, right? But ultimately you have to decide, right? This is cool, this rip up and so on. That works great. Okay, and then here, I'm just a little worried that this is underpowered, right? That here you took the role of having octaves in here, and here there aren't, right? It's just, this really is backgroundy, and there's something really beautiful and mysterious about this. So I don't want to say don't do it, but I'm just saying, is there enough power here in the melody, especially considering where you take it next. And this is really cool, the dropping off, right? You don't quite get to E though. It sort of puzzles me. Like this sort of ends up not completing the phrase. So I just say, go ahead, complete the phrase, right? Give us the E's here in in your flutes and oboes in the first piccolo. Because you do that here, and yeah. So and once again, like, where does the phrase start? Right, the phrase starts on bum bum bum. It doesn't start on the downbeat, right? So maybe the background cushion, you could go pow on the E, and then start the background here, or go forte piano, because like this E above is really going to soar over the actual musical idea, which is 2, 3, 1, bum 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 bum, right? So I think that like you could put back some articulations in here for your horns and so on. We're kind of losing the top note of the harmony right in here. Like you've sort of inverted everything and kind of changed the context of things. But I still think we need that E in there somewhere. All right, and then this is it's interesting. It's smoother. Bia, bia. I like the pow right there. Bia. So you're going chord, pow, right? And that's great. It's just like my concern is just the longer tones right in here, kind of making things maybe a little too smooth. Then finally here at the end, like the whole question of like maintaining a driving staccato, transitioning smoothly into the next passage. It's kind of not really clear about where this is headed. Here you don't have to say simile, like the players will get it. Like if they get a row of staccatos and then like they just keep playing staccato unless you change things. So you don't have to say simile or simile if you prefer. Same thing with your flute player. I would say that like if you're going to support the melody from above with your first flute, right? Two things to be aware of. First is that in a situation like this, the flute can be absorbed into the sound of the strings. I think I wrote a tip on that. You can check it out just on the website. You don't have to buy 100 more orchestration tips, but I think it's the first flute tip, and it's called the case of the disappearing flute. So I think if you're going to do this from above, I think you should also harmonize. The harmonization should be doubled in some way, whether it's doubled from above or doubled at pitch by a wind instrument member. I mean, you got your tenor saxophone just doing these cute little lines. What are they going to do afterwards? Bup, 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 bup. They could easily throw in that. Or you could have your, like, you could have a bassoonist handle some of it. Clarinet players not doing anything. There are a bunch of different instruments that could be doubling this at pitch or doubling from the inside, right? Yeah. So that the big issue here, I think, is does the xylophone help this connecting phrase add part B to part A, right? So if this is leading towards something that has a sort of a prominent part in the rest of the music, then it's great. But if it doesn't, then people are just listening to the xylophone playing patterns, and they're not really listening to the music headed in a specific direction, right? So that's the danger that you're running into by kind of going minimalist on us right here at the end. No, I mean, like, there's nothing wrong with it. It's like really a cool idea. So just like judging it on its merits of orchestration, that's fine. But judging it like in terms of the proportion of your task to bring this score to life for a potential orchestra to play and appreciate, then you have to, you might have to make decisions in different ways, right? So yeah, so that's my take on this. Just so much of, such a fun score, and it's so many cool things. I mean, I just love the parallel fifths and fourths and octaves and so on in here. That's, it's very naughty, but very, very fun. And yeah, I mean, you got the makings of a first-class orchestrator, Erica, and it's something you should absolutely do, and pursue. If there is any, I mean, you yourself have your own music, you have your own life as, in popular music. If there was any way that your activities somehow ran into an orchestra and you were suddenly on stage with your band and you had an orchestra behind you, or even just yourself as a soloist with an orchestra behind you, you should go for it, because you've got the chops to make it work. One last little thing is I love the contrary motion in here, but it sort of begs the question of why it didn't continue going, right? Like why the bass part didn't end up going downwards and the treble parts going upwards, right? So just like that, it's great to start, but it's kind of like, throwing in contrary motion to an upward line is just like trying to eat one peanut, right? Like, the listener wants to hear more, and you might want to put in more than you planned, and so on. So just watch out for that. Okay, so just really, really fun. Really, really happy to look at this, and in a way, this sort of brings a lot of the other entries in this into balance, right? You can sort of see like a lot of the different, the will to just not do the same thing, or to, even when like interpreting exactly what's on the page, as with the previous evaluation, that in itself becomes something quirky and unusual, right, in the scope of everything that's going on. So so this is a really great centering kind of entry to the group of people who are contributing. So so just really great, really fun. And now on to the very last entry of this very worthwhile group of entrants. And that takes us to Chun Hei Lau's contribution here. And it's very, very fun. It really rolls along at a very fast tempo. This is one of those things where, like the faster you push it, like the less clear things can possibly be. So you have to watch out about like when you're going really really fast, accents in eighth notes, for instance, right? So like really getting the articulation to work very very well. Now staccatos in eighth notes is no problem at all, but like just the clarity of accents, that's a concern. And so like Chun Hei, you might have noticed that the in my announcement video that I recommended a slower tempo, like 60. And I think that in the case of your score, that it would make things much much clearer in terms of what you're trying to accomplish and your particular approach. So a few notes which I think will be very useful to you in scoring for harp. Right here, you're using an upward pointing roll mark. You do not need to do that. Just use a regular roll mark. Whenever you use an upwardly pointing roll mark, you are telling the player that there are going to be downward pointing rolls, right? They're going to be reverse rolls where they start rolling at the top and they end up rolling down to the bottom. So if there aren't going to be reverse rolls, you do not need to use the upward pointing roll. That is really only like saying, well, I'm rolling up and then I'm going to roll down. And so that's why we need the pointer on the opposite ends. So you're just confusing things. Just use a standard roll mark. Okay? Generally speaking, the harp scoring is pretty good. I would say make this even bigger. I would say make the roll bigger, like have it cover more ground. You could even have a three-handed roll where the left hand plays a big chord at the bottom and then the right hand rolls and then the left hand keeps rolling above it. So they're sort of exchanging hands. Because this is strong harp scoring in the context of the tutti that you are orchestrating. So a big roll on harp has got a much better chance of being heard. Now, what doesn't have a chance of being heard is this, right? So you've got everybody's playing fortissimo. They're playing staccato, like on the accompaniment part and so on, and the harp part will just get buried. It does not really have much to contribute. If you want a plucked kind of a sound, you could try pizzicato, like more pizzicato in violas and so on, right? But like adding it in harp, it just won't be heard. This note down here won't be heard. Better for you to have pizzicato octaves in your contrabasses, right? And maybe staccato in the bassoons. But this this does not have a chance of being heard. Now this roll, once again, is perfectly fine, right? This will be invisible. And in terms of this, you know, like we're getting to this glissando here. All you need to do is mark the end points, like just put a quarter note C here, and then we have the E at the end, and then you put the line between them, and you say glissando. Then you have a little harp pedal diagram that tells the harpist how the pedals are going to be set. And if you don't put that in, then the harpist will just look at the key signature and say, okay, well, I'll just have everything, I'll have all my pedals sitting in the middle. But if you want to throw in like a G sharp or like some other kind of thing to make it sort of weird sounding, then you really have to tell us what's going on. And I would say do that anyways. You could also do it in text. Apologies, I have a slight scratchy throat. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the evaluation criteria as they apply to this, right? So the first thing is, pitch weight, middle register of the piano, no pitches below middle C is a bit of a concern. Keeps everything a little too bright all the way through. Here you're adding some low notes. I would say that you could add timpani, you could add maybe trombone, or like I said before, bassoons, like playing octaves, just like adding some boom. But that is enough of a difference between these two. See, I know you want to do that because you have the harp in here. You just need to have that more weighty in instruments that can be heard, right? So your cellos are busy. So I would say octave double basses, divisi. Or you could actually have the double basses non-divisi. with the low E, the open E string, and then the A string above it would be fingered to play this E, and they could just be playing a big boom, like a big plucked E octave with no problem. And throw in some timpani on top of that. Bassoons playing like a accented E octave, then I think you have that weight. Boom, dun 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 dun, boom, dun 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 dun. It's just much more convincing than this harp octave that is just not going to do. It's not going to sound very loud. So, that is enough. Even just those notes, like at the beginning of every other bar, is enough to differentiate the two parts and make it feel like it's not just copy-paste, right? Now, sempre fortissimo, the place to say that is here, right? At the beginning, right? If it's always going to be fortissimo, right? But then again, do you really want sempre fortissimo? Because you're already fortissimo, and then you're going crescendo to fortissimo. You're already fortissimo. And here you're saying forte to fortissimo. So don't you mean that everybody should play softer here? Right? Wouldn't it be nice to have some dynamic contrasts here? Maybe drop down to forte or mezzo forte. Maybe drop down to forte or mezzo forte here, and then you have some place to come back to fortissimo, right? So maybe some variation is called for. So now let's talk about melodic development soaring quite high. Accompaniment figures covering a wide range of pitches and wind registers. Let's talk about the accompaniment first, because we were on that just a minute ago. So I think that this is a really, a great use of the clarinets and oboes together, right? So it really is using the strengths of each instrument. And, you've got your violas helping out here, pizzicato cellos, that all works fine. And then here it's a bit solid, right? You're just really sitting on that chonk, 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 chonk. I think it's a little early because you're doing something similar right in here, right? You're going here. This is actually 2-1, right? The phrasing is starting on the second beat and then ending on the first beat of the next bar, right? So this is kind of backwards of that. It's starting on the first beat and then the second beat, the way you've got the rhythmic phrasing. So this may be looking forward to this a little bit too much. This might be too much of a resonance. It's like you're giving away the game. You're letting us know too soon. Now that this is in. I realize that is in the piano part, but is it this emphatic in the piano part? Not really. It's more of an underlining and playing off of this rhythmic pattern right in here. So I would say that it might need just a little bit of work to before you achieve more perfection on that, and especially if you're relying on harp to help you out at all here, it really doesn't have much of a chance. If you were to drop everything down to piano, then you would hear the harp. Same thing here. If this went down to piano, or even pianissimo, then the harp would come through beautifully. But everything's fortissimo still, so doesn't really give you very many options. I love the use of the French horn in here, right? But you have to tell us which one. French horn 1 and 2. So is this the first French horn, the second French horn? Who's playing this? Generally speaking, like you're making an effort here. You're saying 2 with your flutes, first oboe, first clarinet. So just make sure that you apply that to your brass as well, right? How many brass are being used on what part, why, right? Okay. So let's talk about the treatment of the melody. So so these are all possible, right? And as I said before, that high D, that is the top musical note that the flute can play, right? It's like, and you get above that, it starts to get kind of wheezy and squeaky and doesn't make any sense. But it's still a note that you can score. It's still fine. And it's the same thing is true for the violins, except that like right here, as I mentioned before, you have very short string length. Here you're asking them to play marcato and fortissimo crescendo, right? So there's a limited amount of effectiveness. Now you've got these instruments doubling each other, and they're going to help each other out, but there's still going to be a bit of a kind of a scratchy, sort of a squeaky, sort of a sheen to it up here. Even with good players, they'll control some of that, but you'll still have that. It'll still feel a bit thin, a bit, and which is why, like, using piccolo to help out, as you've seen with other instruments, using little compromises where the first violins actually drop down a little bit, but you think that they're playing higher. All those kinds of things actually lead to a richer interpretation. And of course, like we've seen, like xylophone and so on, used by some orchestrators. You don't have to do that, but it's just to say that you've got options. You've got more options than just going up to D. It'll work, but you're going very fast. You're having very strongly articulated notes, lots of staccato, lots of accents, and so on and so forth. It just adds a lot of things to what the player has got to do, and you may have one shot at this, right? One shot at getting this score performed, and if it does really, really well, maybe you've got a second shot, right? So that's why you should just really try to make your scores as playable as possible. Limited amount of raised hands at rehearsal. People saying, look, I can't do this, or do you mean this or that? And you know that if people do that in your first rehearsal, they're going to do it in the second and the third, and every time they do it, that subtracts a certain amount of time, a very, very valuable time, from the study of your work before it's performed. And it still may not be good, because, like, if they don't get a clear answer, then they're just going to do whatever they want. Maybe that's not what you want, right? So think about all these things. All right, now here you are. I love this. You're harmonizing your melody going upwards. Divisi would kind of be your option there. And here, I think this is wise, right? This once again, like piccolo would be really. You could have scored piccolo in there. I think it would be a very strong addition. And then everything, like you were phrasing to the first beat and finishing it on the first beat with all of this. I love the contrary motion in here. It's very simple and effective. Bassoons, trombone. I like the fact that you sort of start on two and rather than earlier. I think that also works just with the kind of headlong motion rather than starting before, right? Every score is different, but it really is effective in this score. And then of course B-flat trumpet coming in, the horns. I feel that's probably the most effective part of this entire score is right in here. And the way that you phrase to this and stop, and then bum bum ba ya da 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 dun da 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 dun. That's all done very, very well. Okay, and then like the way that the accompaniment is played is fine, right? Like I think that it's cool the way that you end this right here, like you're ending your little one bar phrase on the downbeat with just a punch from your brass rather than like kind of braying in the middle there. It's better to have your strings and your winds play that harmony with this particular approach that you've got. I also like the fact that the way that you scored the melody right in here, with doubling the first flute with the first violins, and then you've got first clarinet with the second violins. That works pretty well. It's a little strange right in here that I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to take the weight away from the octave, right? But yeah, it's just this little part right down here in clarinet. I'm not sure if that works for me, but anyway. Then you've got this yup up 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 bum. You could have finished off you could have continued on with your octaves, right? And then had it just walk up into the melody, right? I think it would work fine. Yup up 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 up. So you've got this, and I don't understand this. why, I think you should just either completely leave out the strings, just end the strings here, end the first violin there, and then just have a rest. I don't think that this quite works the way that you think it does. Like, you want your strings, you want the violins to continue on and then just disappear, right? If that's so, then you have to say triple P right in here. You have to say, because otherwise they'll just bring it down to maybe piano, mezzo piano, and then you'll just suddenly hear the strings drop off and the wind's continuing, right? So I think it's better just to stop here with your first violins and then just have it continue on with winds only. And that's just a much more effective way of making the colors very vivid between the instruments. And this is perfect, this little handoff here between first clarinet and first bassoon was really nice. Okay, so yeah, just a great score to end on. I thought it was just really effective and really enjoyable, and just once again, very strong orchestration, just pointing towards a more professional kind of an approach. And the scoring is nice, just the general engraving and so on. Maybe just a little bit more attention to what harp can and can't do. Like you've got some strong scoring in here. Just get rid of the arrow. You have some strong scoring in here. You have some scoring that doesn't quite really do anything. These octaves below. There are stronger instruments that can handle this this emphasis on the E, right? But generally speaking, nicely done. And of course, so right in here, like I think you might have forgotten to put in a note, right? Because you're just saying shh. So if you intend this to be sustained, and then just to keep sort of ringing your suspended cymbal, then I think that you need to have an end point. So you tie this to, say, another dotted half note, and then just have another tie mark that isn't completed, right? And then it'll just ring, and then the players can keep playing. But I think the way that this is not enough to state your intentions in an accurately notated way. Okay, so just really, really great. So I was very happy with this group of scores. Like to some people watching this, you might feel that some of the scores were maybe not complete, or maybe there were some errors or some other kinds of approaches. But I have to take it all at face value, right? And that makes me better at evaluating things and not taking people for granted. So that's A. And then B, like just really focusing on what works and what doesn't, regardless of people's intentions, I think is also just makes us, if we all develop that talent, like that just makes us really good at finding out new things, whether, and not making assumptions once again, right? So I enjoyed looking at all of these scores, and it was just really a kick. And there were some entrants in here who had some scores that were almost ready for the stands, and there were some others that are going to need a bit more work. But altogether, just a really great display of the different approaches and imagination, and as I mentioned before, quirkiness. There are some quirks, some bigger and smaller quirks in, I think, each score, and that keeps things interesting for me, right? Just the breadth of imagination and the kind of willingness to change things around and not just leave it the way that it is. That is going to keep it fresh, and that's a good thing, because I got 10 more of these big collections to do. And at this point, I think about 40 more evaluations over on Patreon. So that's another 100 scores. I think I've made it about 60 scores now. But I'm really enjoying it. It's like it's not burning me out or anything. It's just very exciting and fun. So I might do another set of evaluations today, but I've got to go have breakfast now. So thanks everybody so much for your entries, and thanks everybody out there on Patreon who is not only watching this video, and supporting this entire challenge, but also like leaving comments on everything. It's amazing, just people are commenting on this and that. And I would say if everybody on this video could comment on everybody else's contribution in a constructive way here on YouTube or maybe in the Facebook post, that would be really awesome. That would make me want to do another challenge more than anything, the more comments that I see. So thanks in advance for that, and thanks everybody once again, and I will see you in the next evaluation whenever that is posted.